Hi, Nomi Prinz here from Prinsights Global, and I'm so excited to have this next guest here, Danielle DiMartino Booth, who is the CEO and the founder of QI Research and an incredible, brilliant, omnipresent person on the global economic stage. Thank you so much, Danielle, for joining me here.
Good to see you, Nomi. It's been some time.
It has, and we go back. I was just looking at some old photos of 6, 7, 8 years ago where your book Fed Up had just come out. Of course, that's been a massive bestseller, and it's really exciting to have you here.
Well, it is good to be back with you. I love that people continue to discover Fed Up. I think it's probably one of the most enjoyable aspects of my career is that it still resonates after all these years, and it's great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. And again, the fact that it does resonate, I think, is also a part of how much additional focus that book in particular and in general has been on the Fed. And you and I were just talking about the Fed a little bit before starting the tape here, and about how Powell's in a pretty difficult position right now. Could you talk a bit about that?
So time is running out. Time is running out for Jerome Hayden Powell, and I think that he's increasingly aware of his own personal dual mandate, if you will. He is chair of the Federal Reserve Bank. He is also trying to press forward with some regulations that would change how the non-banks operate and interact with the banks, with the conventional banking system. So, you know, in a post-Dodd-Frank world, the non-banks, the private equity, the kingpins, I call them, they really have been able to be cowboys of sorts and to operate outside of the regulatory purview. But their non-banks globally are now 240 trillion. The conventional banking system globally is 180 trillion. So now you're realizing the larger of the two is completely unregulated. So Jay Powell is cognizant of his legacy in trying to rein in these cowboys, but at the same time, time is running out for him because of the recessionary signposts in the United States. They're no longer subtle, and therefore he knows that he will be prompted to act, and it will likely happen before the U.S. election. So,
Do you think there is any political motivation there?
No, I don't. I think that one of the most misunderstood and propagated myths is that somehow Jay Powell is working in cahoots with Janet Yellen to prop up the stock market. It's all hooey. It really, really is. That is not to say that Jay Powell's not a political animal. He was a political animal when he was Undersecretary of the U.S. Treasury. He worked with Warren Buffett when a Treasury scandal broke out at Salomon Brothers, and successfully worked the country through that chapter that we forget about. And he has been up to the hill more than any of his predecessors, speaking to people in Congress on both sides of the aisle. So Jay Powell is very political. He is not partisan at all. And whether you're talking about Trump, which was a very public castigation and attack of Powell, or if you're talking about Biden, which was more behind closed doors, but also an attack on Jay Powell and his integrity by trying to replace him as chair of the Fed. Jay Powell has absolutely no motivation to do any favors for either presumptive nominee or anybody to replace them. That's not how he operates. It's not who he is. He is, he's made mistakes in his career, but I do think he is a man of integrity.
That's really interesting because he was recently in front of the Senate Banking Committee, and there were senators from both sides of the aisle who were really grilling him on the data, which is something that he has talked many times about as being a follower of, both because unemployment is rising and inflation is still there, and whether he's going to notice, for example, that it's more expensive for people to buy homes, pay for mortgages, and so forth.
Of course. I think that one of the reasons you're seeing this stress in Jay Powell's face, you're watching him age in real time, is because I think the person who he is now understands that buying up, at the peak of the Fed's holdings of mortgage-backed securities, they held 38% of the market on the Fed's balance sheet. Christopher Waller came in and has kind of become his chief lieutenant, and they've kind of accepted, taken account. They're accountable for the role that the Federal Reserve played in making housing as unaffordable as it is today. But by the same token, I think they understand that they need to exit that business forever. And that quantitative easing for mortgage-backed securities should have never been something that the Fed was engaged in, as well as the zero bound. So come what may in this recession, I think that if it's feasible to avoid going back to the zero bound for the federal funds rate, that he's going to put every energy into that.
So you think he's going to try to unwind maybe the mortgage-backed securities part of the balance sheet a little more quickly than the rest?
Well, he has said, and we've begun to see some rumblings in the overnight funding market, a little bit of instability there. And he has been very upfront in saying, even if we have to taper and back out of the positioning and the shrinkage of the Treasury side of the balance sheet, we'll certainly be able to continue rolling off those mortgage-backed securities. Two different markets, two different mechanical functions. One is much more sensitive and systemic in nature, the Treasury market, of course. And the other, I think he has the opportunity to play some catch up as interest rates do come down and mortgage prepayment speeds accelerate.
That's really interesting. I think you are one of the few people that are actually talking about that idea of bifurcating the quantitative tightening of that balance sheet as it continues. Do you, speaking of mortgages and the mortgage-backed securities that were there because of the subprime crisis, are you concerned about some of what's going on in the commercial real estate market?
So I am concerned about commercial real estate, and I'm concerned about commercial real estate at the intersection of commercial and residential real estate. And I think that there's too little appreciation of people putting commercial real estate and residential real estate in two different silos when it's become an investable asset class on either side of the fence, when multifamily is as over-invested and overdeveloped as it is. Earlier when I presented at the Rule Symposium, I put up a slide that showed that in the most recent quarter, only 47% of the apartments that had come out of the construction pipeline had been rented. You've got a problem on your hands if more than 50% of the apartments that are coming out to be leased for the first time are not being rented. And that is simply a reflection of an overabundance of supply in apartments, which is in the commercial real estate realm, but certainly affects residential real estate. So I think speaking of the two in isolation is dangerous. One is going to amplify, commercial real estate is going to amplify the downturn in residential real estate because there's so much supply that people can choose to rent instead and leave those Airbnb jocks who are getting out of the business of weekly rentals, leave them high and dry because there's no financing. And that's kind of where we've come in this cycle.
Yeah, and that's definitely a concern as we potentially get to a recession or whatever else. We're coming to an end here. It went by very fast, and thank you so much for your time. With respect to the general investor, the average person watching this today, do you have any words of caution for them in terms of particular areas they should be more concerned about than we've already discussed, or areas of investment where you think they might be able to protect some of their wealth?
So I think we are and should be in a capital preservation mode at this point. I'm not speaking about predicting where markets go, but if you look back historically, it is not until the Fed embarks upon a loosening campaign, actually makes the first rate cut, that stocks begin to correct in earnest. So in that sense, in that time is money, which it still is, last check, time is still money. In that time is money, I certainly think that people have time to either hedge their portfolios or get to the sidelines. You're still being paid a decent yield on your cash, and there's nothing to be ashamed of as long as interest is compounding, something you can share with your kids and grandkids, right? So, but again, I think people need to be cognizant of history right now. It is not until the Fed starts to cut rates that stocks actually correct in a big way, and to the extent that you can get in front of that, good for you.
Well, thank you so much for all of your wisdom, for all of the work you do, and for joining me here today from the Rick Roll Conference. Thank you, Naomi Prinz from Prinsights Global.